Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Keep the Mic On. As we have said several times, since the beginning of March 2020, we have been here in conversation with an amazing artist who happens to be a good friend of ours as well. So we're always excited about that, which makes me doubly excited about tonight's guest. I am simply Sherry. My week is called From Behind the Microphone, where we take the time to get to know the person behind the performer because performers are people too. We have some amazing conversations, and I definitely wish you to go back in our timeline, go back through some of our previous episodes and hear some of the conversation that we bring up. I want to talk about passion projects with Ms. Cayenne, where she gets to the root of the why. She is away tonight, so she could not be here. Also tonight, our other host, Kaniki Jakarta, is having to take care of other matters, but we're still going to go ahead and do the show. 5 or 5,000, you will get the same show. Also, Kaniki would say this is the time to tell all of your friends and family and them that we are now streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube. So come on in and take a watch. Also, these platforms are not free. We volunteer our time. Our artists volunteers their time. Scrolling across the bottom of the screen, I always go backwards.
No, you're doing it the right way.
I got this time as our Cash App. So please feel free to drop $1 or $2. If you don't even have that, just follow, like, subscribe us on all of our social medias, especially on YouTube and Facebook, because we get those numbers up. Let Google and them pay us a little bit of coins. You know, we don't want a whole lot, just a little bit of coins, just a couple.
Little bit of coins. No. Last week's guest said manifest.
Manifest, yes. Pay. We want the coins. We want Google and them to start paying us. So please like, subscribe, follow YouTube, Facebook, all social media at Keep the Mic On. I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's host. Please give it up for the one, the only girl genius.
Hey y'all, if you do not know me or not familiar, my name is Girl Genius. Good to be here with you this week. My week is called Let's Talk About the ... Usually books, but I've had more / artists lately. So they are playwrights and authors, and I'm just super excited. And I have an amazing guest. If you can read what's at the top of this screen, I have an amazing guest, and I'm so excited to have you on the show. It's like I've been waiting for this for a while. So I'm gonna give you the brief bio, and then I'm pretty much gonna let him speak for himself on this one. I have Obbie West, who is the owner of Words of West. Let me pull this up right quick and make sure I got my notes proper and correct here. He was a soldier in the U.S. Army for 20 years, travels the world as a guest speaker, presenting life-depicting poetry on a variety of topics, sexual violence prevention advocate, committed to promoting awareness through training and education, social activist in the field of promoting of signature behaviors, motivating individuals through poetry, and comprehensive discussion to focus on building a culture of trust by building cohesive teams. And I'm telling you, this is the short version of this bio. I don't even think I have the proper words to tell you how amazing this gentleman is and how pumped I am to have him on the show. And yes, I use the word pumped in a sentence because I'm crazy. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to bring you in. And I'm going to go over there, and you're going to do poems and things. Everybody give it up for Obbie West.
Nothing solidifies a man's life like watching his junior slide out and have his cord sliced. A slice of his cord covered in his own blood feels like the creation above all creations. Men beckon for boys like it's blasphemous for any other gender to be born, right? It's because we're men and we're tough. We want them to be tougher than we've ever been. We want to teach them how we were taught, teach them to mask emotions behind masculinity, be masochists, kiss pain on the forehead with an unfazed face, face fears with a bald fist, and swing them to fix issues. Teach them that tears are for climbing, not crying. No, we don't cry. We make cry. Be stoic. Be statue when she asks you to express your feelings. Play the field like Major League Baseball. Swing that bat, boy. And as long as my blood boils through your veins, you should never simmer down and never do anything to jeopardize how hard you are. So during the second trimester, when we just seconds away from a decision being made, men pray that the ultra doesn't sound off with "it's a girl." No, no, no. See, we don't want to be forced to feel feelings, and there's nothing like a bundle of X chromosomes to turn an X stone face into a face full of waterfalls. First sight of her face and eye levies break, and then there's an instant transformation from warrior to unworthy. Our face fills with feelings of inferiority as we sob at the sight of our new superior. That little heifer's in charge now. Only 7 seconds out the wound, already seized every section of your heart, heaved all your heart out the window, and her cry sounds like a license to kill anyone who's uninformed enough to force a frown to form on her face, and a smile becomes your government. Her every request is law. To tell her no feels like having thumbtacks slowly tapped into your thumb, and then her mother instantly becomes the enemy by trying to ruin her life by telling her what's right, and then we come swoop in like Superman, and sweep her off her feet with comforting words like, "Baby, listen, just go get the candy out the cabinet, okay? Oh, you can have it. You're immune to cavities, and don't worry about your mother. She's just upset because she's still babysitting baby fat." It's messed up, right? See, these little girls, they make us stupid. They'll cause an emotional apex. Any mention of them in negative context, we become ape-like. We disregard karma's protocol. We don't want to hear that our past behavior may affect them later, that the way we treated another father's daughter may become part of our daughter's destiny. See, it's like a double standard. We protect them behind triple strand concertina wire, but then we're hardwired to hurt another one. So we tell our sons, our heirs, "Hey, welcome to the throne. Go get them, champ." But the premonition of another man's pulse on our princess makes prison life seem extremely possible. The little girl's voice, it sounds like victory. Her eyes are probably the only set on earth calibrated to see through your facade. Man, I swear to you, your daughter will likely be the first female you ever really fall for and teach you the real definition of a door. All before was likely loaded with lust, but this is 100% raw love. It's uncut. Her existence will become more valuable than your own. See, men, we beckon for boys because we don't want to be forced to feel those feelings. That's it. Thank you for having me.
I'm like, oh, I had a moment. Oh, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know. So for people who don't know, so he is all the way on the West Coast. So I appreciate you being here with us. So appreciate it. So let's get into it. Let's first of all, the poem is amazing, but
thank you.
Let's talk about the book. That's what we do. So first of all, tell everybody the name of the book and info and things, and we'll throw some links in there as we go.
Okay. Book is named Blossom. Blossom is a book. It was inspired by my daughter. My daughter wrote a book. Blossom is a few years old. Actually, it's my daughter's 19 now. She wrote her first book when she was 15. So that makes Blossom 4 years old. And she wrote a book at 15. I didn't have a book. So I just wrote a book because she had one. And I didn't want her to be able to say, "I got a book and you don't have a book," right? So I never aspired to be an author prior to that. I wrote the book because she had a book. And it's pretty much it's just a relationship of poems that covers all different topics. So we talk about love, the nice part, the ugly part. We talk a little bit about lust. We even talk about the irrelevance of mailboxes nowadays because everything is digital. We talk about the mental instability of a woman during Red Ribbon Week, right? When the kitty cat has a nosebleed during that time of the month. We talk about all those things. So it's just a relationship with poems, and it was a fun time. I really enjoyed it. My daughter inspired me to do it. Right now, I don't have any more hard copies, so the book is an audio book form on Spotify and Apple Music. Yeah, that's the book.
No, two people listening. He did say it's an audio book on Spotify, and this is also we do throw this up as a podcast on Spotify on top of the video. So if you're listening, you could add that right behind this on the playlist. I'm just saying. There you go. So I'm still cracking up at irrelevance of mailboxes.
Yeah. It was just about, it was just a poem that talks about how conversation has changed, right? How, back in the days, if we wanted to send a letter, the effort that goes into handwriting something that has gone away, even to the extent we don't even have to spell words completely. I can just put in half of the word. If my phone's familiar with it, it's going to finish the word for me. So effort has went down significantly as it pertains to communication. I just use that mailbox, or the irrelevance of the mailbox, as an analogy to explain how communication has changed.
That's a dope concept. I just hadn't thought about it. I was like, one, I can't remember the last time I've seen one.
Yeah.
They've gone the way of the dodo.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, I just had a conversation about this not too long ago. I was talking about like things that didn't exist prior to technology. And I said, one of the things somebody pointed out to me a long time ago, that the question, if somebody calls you, you never ask, where are you? Prior to the invention of the cell phone. Because if somebody called you, you always knew where they were because they were calling from a landline.
They were home, yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's crazy, the level of dependence, right? I think we had way greater survival techniques back then when we didn't have much, and now that we have things, people who were born, and even some of us who were born during the generation when we didn't have these things, I don't even know if we know how we would survive now if the things went away.
The fact that Survivor is a game show says way too much about where we are as a civilization right now.
Even me, I've grown very dependent. I live in Las Vegas and I don't know how to get around this place. So if I'm driving and my phone goes dead, the navigation, I just pull over and start crying or something, right? Because I don't know what to do after that. So the level of dependency is astronomical.
So I used to live in Las Vegas. I understand that way too well. What's crazy is, so I have a Rand McNally, an actual physical Rand McNally map book. I have had to break it out at some point in the age of dependency on things. I've had to break it out at least once in the last 10 years because something happened where GPS wasn't working, something was getting thrown off. I don't know where I'm at. And I was in the middle of Mississippi, I want to say, when that happened. So I was like, no. What we're not going to do is get lost.
Right.
It's a lost art.
Right. Absolutely. We don't really have the responsibility to think too much no more. I mean, people are delivering groceries at people's houses now. So it's crazy.
I will tell you, that's a fabulous thing. Don't play with me. I have deliveries coming today. I guarantee you.
It's convenient. It's absolutely convenient, right?
It's absolutely funny though. Oh, I was looking at the comment and I was like trying to figure out what it is. I was like, it's a quote from the poem. Got you.
Oh, yeah.
Our little silent member is back there quoting your poems.
Yeah. I put my hat to him for remembering that line. So I appreciate you listening to that attention.
Yeah, there's so many like just good grab on lines. So now that you've done the head to head with the kid in writing a book, we'll get back to that. I'm at the same I'm at the same stage as you. I have she'll be 18 in 3 weeks. And they're at that real good age where they want to do a bunch of stuff. I can't compete. She wants to do, she's an artist. She's a graphic artist, an anime artist. So she's talking about doing books and stuff. And I was like, I can't compete.
Yeah.
I'm guessing she's read it. First of all, you don't look old enough to have a 19-year-old. Second of all, she looks like she's read it. You don't look old enough, but has she read it? That was two different things. Sorry.
You said has she read it?
Has she read it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was available on audiobook when I had the hard copies as well. So she listened to it.
Yeah, she listened to it. Yeah.
She listened to it. Then since then, she wrote another book. At that point, I was like, you can have it. So she wrote another.
You gave it. You just said you can have it.
Yeah.
Are you gonna do it? I love audiobooks. I really do. I really, really do. Like I feel like reading sometimes a lost art, but then there's a whole thing with audiobooks. Are you going to do another one at some point?
Probably a book, probably not. I did do an album. I did an album last year called Unstable Man, and I would probably lean more towards the album. For me, my daughter is great at writing to be read, right? She doesn't need the assistance of her voice, the assistance of hand gestures in order for her message to be vivid. She just has the ability to write words, and you can read those words, and her intent is very, very clear. The picture is vivid. For me, I just feel like I write more to be heard. I feel like it resonates more when it's accompanied by me delivering it, when it's accompanied by facial expression, hand gestures, and I don't feel like it resonates the same when it's written. So she writes great to be written. I think I write great to be heard. So with that, I'm not as inspired to do books. I'm more apt to do something to where I can deliver it verbally.
You know, we've had discussions on this show before about paper versus voice. We've had discussions on this, especially on this segment. I
Mhm.
am a writer by profession. Like
Mhm.
that's what I've been doing since I was 15. So I will tell you that I'm a better writer by far than I am a spoken poet. I don't like the sound of my own voice. I
Mhm.
am not a stage person, but I do this because I do enjoy it, of course, but also because I feel like no one else is going to get this across the same way I could. Like, yeah, you can read the book. It, you have some read a book. You can see the nuance in some of the stuff that I do, but at the same time, sometimes people need to hear things like is and having seen your shows, you know what I'm saying, and I haven't seen you on stage, like I totally get that. Like I find it very hard to not like I can't like most of the time when I listen to poetry shows. Here's a good example. Most of the time I listen to poetry shows when I'm at an open mic or something. I'll close my eyes and listen, right? Because I'm trying to make sure I hear it, that I'm not distracted by stuff. I couldn't stop watching your show. I'm like, this is the most mesmerizing thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
I appreciate that.
And literally for people who weren't here the last time you were in this area doing a show, like he sat down on stage and did a whole show just sitting with a mic and just transitioning from one poem to the next poem to the next poem. It's one of the most amazing features I've ever seen.
Thank you. Thank you. I think for me, I'm a huge fan of the creative part of writing. Of course, the content is first and foremost. I would never sacrifice the content in order to say something creative. So if the content is there, and then I can figure out how to say it in a way that's sonically appealing, that works for me. So with that being the case, sometimes that beautiful relationship between sounds comes by how I pronounce a word. I might not pronounce it the way it's traditionally pronounced, but if I wrote that word in a book, you're going to read it the way it's traditionally pronounced, and now you lose that relationship between that word and the syllables in the previous word. So now the creative part goes away, right? So I think in order for every component of my writing to be on display, I have to say it. So because of that, I kind of steer away from writing books.
Weirdly, I'm the exact opposite. Like I'll say something, but if I need you to really just catch it, like I have figured out how to manipulate it on a page and how to break it so that you read it, you know what it is, but you know, aha, I need to be looking for something because it doesn't look like what I think it should.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I've learned how to break lines and space things out and you know use homonyms and it's weird. Like
Hmm.
it comes with like you'll hear me say it, but you see it on page and you're like, oh, that makes so much more sense now.
Right. I get it. I get it.
That's crazy. Like I
Yeah.
said, we've had multiple conversations on the show about that because we have some people who are like, yeah, I the experience is different.
Hmm.
And it is. The experience of hearing versus seeing things is different.
Right.
So,
Absolutely. It is.
so this is so when you, because you're a stage presence. I'm not even gonna say you're a stage, well, you're a stage presence. Let's start there. You are a stage presence because you are a full-time speaker and some other, and you do the poems, but you also are a professional speaker. What does your what is I usually ask about writing process. What does your process look like? Like, what do you do to sort of prepare for giving a presentation, being on stage? How do you sit down and prepare your features? How do you sit down and figure out what's going to work?
Great question. For me, that is very important for me to create the balance between preparing and not over preparing. Right. I love for everything to remain organic. So preparation for me, it pretty much stops at internalizing the content. So if there's a poem that I hadn't memorized, and I just memorize it through repetition. I don't have any tricks. I shut everything down and I say the words to that poem until I know the words. But once I know the words, I know the words, but I hadn't internalized it, which means if you introduce a distraction, I'm going to forget the words. I'm not going to be able to pick up where I left off. So after I know the words, then I'll introduce those distractions. Now I may turn the television on, I may turn on the radio in my car, and now I say the poem while those things are playing. And then at that point, I can now internalize it to where now it doesn't matter what's going on around me. It's just like conversation. Once I've internalized it, then it becomes very conversational. I can recite the poem the way I'm talking, and I don't have to recite it in a certain rhythm, and that rhythm is going to lead me into the next word. I can just recite it the way I'm talking. So it's a couple step process. It's all in repetition, but I first memorize the words. After I memorize the words, I internalize the words, and then I'm prepared to do the poem. But I stop at that. I don't go as far as rehearsing emotion, rehearsing what hand gesture am I going to do when I say this part. I don't. So that's going to change every time I present the poem because I need that to be absolutely organic. If I'm gonna hold a conversation with you, I'm not going to know the conversation ahead of time in order for me to say, when I say I like her hair, I'm going to say I like your hair. You know what I mean? I don't have the luxury to be able to do that. So I don't do it with poems either. I just internalize the words, and wherever the emotion should be, it'll naturally be in that place, and whatever the hand gesture should be that accompanies that, it'll naturally happen.
I think I only mess with like choreographed movement if I think maybe for slam. That might be the only time I ever mess with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes I want a very coordinated long pause,
Mm-hmm.
or I want a very deliberate pay attention to what's happening. So I talk with my hands anyway. So sometimes just to keep me from doing this or this, I will choreograph my movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the only time I really ever play with it. Everything else is, you're right, very organic. And again, for people who have never seen you live, I will tell you, his poems are they're not, he's not loud, he's not the yeller, he's not the screaming poet. It comes off as super conversational. It's like somebody's telling you a story and you're just so enthralled by it, you can't stop listening to it. It's one of those. Like, and I'm not gonna say it's rare because it's not, but it's refreshing.
Thank you. You also asked how do I prepare for a set. Now
I did.
that's the most difficult part for me because of the way I write, and because of the number of poems. You have places that want you to come do poems for 15 minutes, right? So I may have. This is gonna. Can am I losing signal?
No, you're good. On my end, you're fine.
Okay, on my end it's like my it's delayed. So I'll just keep talking. Stop me if it starts
Yep,
to show delay on your side.
will do.
the brain dump series, and this is going to go back into what I was talking about. The reason for the brain dump series is I was writing poems at a pace that surpassed my ability to present them. So I started jotting down, and I would write poems, give them a title, save them at another space in my phone. I have a phone that's dedicated to poetry. It doesn't have a SIM card. I can't make a phone call. I can't take a picture. It's only a notebook, right? And I'm going to go on a tangent, but I'm going to come back. What I found is anybody who loves a thing, they normally have something on their person to exercise that thing, right? If you have a basketball player, an avid basketball player, if you pull their car over and pop their trunk, you're gonna find shoes in the basketball. You find a barber in the airport and you open his bags, you're gonna find clippers. So most people who enjoy a thing, they have something on their person to exercise that thing, except for poets. We get a thought and we have to write it on Laffy Taffy papers. We get a thought and we don't have anywhere to jot it down. We forget the thought. Now we're upset. So only in poetry do we not walk around with something on us to allow us to practice that thing that we have a passion for. So I always kept a BlackBerry. And every year I go on Amazon, I buy a new used BlackBerry. I hook it to Evernote so it syncs with my phone and it's always on my person. So if I'm holding a conversation with you and you said something that intrigued me and that thought seems like something I want to revisit later, I go to a part of my phone called Seeds and I write that thought. So, and then later on, I revisit that thought, and then another line will come, another line will come. At some point, those things become poems. That's how I write poems. So I never sit down and say, today I'm going to write about this and try to write a poem in a setting. Some poems might start 2 years ago. It might not be concluded until now.
Yep.
So because I write that way, I have a surplus of poems that is like, it's like buying shoes. You buy a pair of shoes, you try them on, then they go in the closet, and you never touch them again. I have poems that I've pretty much written, gave it a name, and I pushed it to the side, and it still has the tag on it. So Brain Dump series was a way for me to create a platform to get those poems out there because they're just sitting in my phone collecting dust. So now when somebody says, I need you to come feature, and you got 15 minutes, I got 300 poems to try to pick from for 15. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it becomes extremely difficult because I don't want to repeat the same poems. I want to revisit something I hadn't done. So what I started doing is I just have a structure where I'll start off with something that's very introspective, something that's going to explain to you who I am. And the first 3 poems may be about that. The next 3 poems may be about a social issue. And then the last 3 poems may be about something like love, something to where when the set is over, you feel good. I never want to end a set on I feel like how I leave people is how they leave the place.
Yeah.
So if I end it on a low note, they leave there on a low note. So I always end the set with something that's about love or something like that. So I have a structure to where it's going to be introspective, there's going to be social issues, and then we're going to talk about love or something like that. So that's pretty much how I plan this set.
That's super interesting. I am. This is intriguing. Like I'm going to dig back into this for a minute. First of all, it's an impressive number of poems I have. I don't have that many poems. I don't have that many poems like sitting. I have lines and lines of. I'm a fan of Evernote. Let's start there. I'm a huge fan of Evernote. It has changed my life. I do carry my phone. It's usually attached to my hand. However, I am that poet that carried around a notebook and a pen on a like I have one in my bag. My wife makes fun of me. She's like, why you got that big ass bag? And in 5 seconds, like, put this in your big ass bag. And the reason why is because I always have a notebook, and I used to carry a thesaurus and a rhyming dictionary at one point too. When that made sense. Now it's like, yeah, it's in my phone. I don't have to worry about it. But I do still carry a pen and a pad. A little one, matter of fact. Where'd it go? Right there. I have a little one. So that if there's some moment where I don't have my phone wants to act funny, I need to do it like right then and there, I can always dump, the notes. Right. I am the person that will also write on a receipt, a Laffy Taffy paper, probably not Laffy Taffy, maybe Jolly Ranchers. I don't know, but I will do that if nothing's handy. But I made it a habit to do that. We should do that more often. Mm-hmm. That's part 1. Number 2, I think it's really fascinating how you put set lists together. I am of the mindset that when I do sets and features, in the God knows how many years I've been doing features, I've never repeated a feature. I've never repeated the exact same set twice.
Mm-hmm.
Like I may pull some poems in that I've done before that are favorites that people expect me to do, or that, maybe the host requests, and I'll take a request I'll take a request, because if y'all are happy with this and this is the mood you want, that's cool. I'll work with it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But I've never verbatim repeated any set twice in, like, I want to say 15 years.
That's impressive. Yes,
that keeps me right. That inspires me that pushes me to write, so that I have more stuff to put in the arsenal. But yeah, that's kind of the impetus for that. Does that, because you already have, like, you have enough material for basically a one-man show where it never ever repeated?
Yeah, there's a lot there, and a large reason for that is when I first started doing poetry, I was in the military, so I wasn't able to travel and do poetry at the rate that I wanted to, but I was always writing. So these poems are being created, but there's no outlet. And then I go to Korea for 2 years. I'm in Korea for 2 years where there is no live poetry. So for 2 years, everything that was written just sat. And 90% of my presentations nowadays are for advocacy. So I go to organizations and we talk about abuse reduction, and we talk about um, prevention and things of that nature. Those presentations are also facilitated through poetry, but I may introduce a topic with a poem and then I go into discussion. So it's a 90-minute presentation that only includes like 2 poems. So it's not often that I have the privilege or the honor to do a nightlife event. So now that's another reason why these poems are just sitting, because when I'm doing these advocacy presentations, I'm only talking about this topic. So the rest of these poems are just sitting. So I've had plenty of time to where I wasn't able to go out and just do features and nightlife events, because I was always working in advocacy, or I was in Iraq, I'm in Afghanistan, I'm in these places where I'm constantly writing. But you know what I mean? You take a person and you incarcerate them. You incarcerate them for 4 or 5 years, and they write for 4 or 5 years. When they get out, they got a lot of shit to say.
Yep.
Right? So it's synonymous to that.
I was gonna say that, first of all, back up. When did you start writing? When did you start writing poetry?
In 2011, I was 31.
You're also one of those, you said, wait, how old?
I was 31.
You're also one of those rare unicorns, kind of like you're one of those rare unicorns that a lot of times, like, I'm expecting people to go, yeah, I started writing when I was 12. I started writing when I was 17. I started writing in high school. You're one of those rare unicorns. Like, yeah, I didn't start writing until I was like 30, in my 30s.
Yeah, 30. I was 31 years old. And actually, Blossom, my first book, it starts on page 31. There's no page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first page of the book is page 31, because that was when I started writing poetry.
That's crazy. That's dope, though. But yeah, that's one of those rare unicorn things. Like, I didn't start at 17 either. I didn't start until I was in my 20s.
Okay,
I didn't start doing poetry, and I did that by accident. I didn't start doing poetry seriously till I was probably in my late 20s.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people they would say they've been writing since they was 5, and it's been a life. It's been a life for a lot of people. For me, it started.
I've been writing since I was 5. I've been writing like I'm talking about. The first time I got published, I was 5. Let me get that right. I started writing professionally at 15, but I didn't start doing poetry till I was in my 30s.
Got it.
Yeah, I was like, no, I couldn't even see, like if you'd have asked me at that age if I saw myself doing this thing, I would have said no.
Right.
I would have definitely said no. I by way of introduction, I think we did the traditional introduction of, not that I don't like it, because I absolutely do. I was reading like Shakespeare and that, and the epics, poetry, like way back when. But I think that was my introduction, and I probably would have maybe thought that's what this was up until I got introduced to it the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. Same here.
I was going to say, what was your introduction? Just curious.
My introduction was, well, aside from being school age and you hearing Shakespeare and things of that nature, but my introduction to spoken word was Killeen Poetry Slam. Um, Christopher Michael, Fatodi, Faressa, Coco Fire, um, Shake, the poet, Crow, John Crow. So that team, Killeen Poetry Slam, when they were together as a team back in 2011, I was stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, in Killeen. And I went to an event that was advertised as a comedy event. And I went there to see comedy. I had never heard of an open mic in my life. And I was 31. I didn't know what that was. When I found out, when I went, I learned that it was an open mic and the feature was a comedian.
Was
So
who?
a comedian.
Ah,
Yeah, so I just saw the flyer comedian and I thought it was a comedy show. It was an open mic with a feature as the comedian. So they started calling these poets on stage, and it was Foressa, it was all these professional poets who were part of the Killeen Poetry Slam. So when they went up there, these poems were highly polished. They were being recited by memory. They weren't being read. They were packed with emotion. And it just instantly, when I saw it, I was like, that's that thing. That's the void that I have right now. I wake up in the morning, I get dressed, I put on a uniform, I go work for an organization, I come home, I take a shower, the next morning I do it again. But what part of this cycle is for me? At the end, when I retire from this, who am I after all of this? And I didn't know what that was. And then when I saw that, that instantly became that thing. So I asked the guy in charge, I said, hey, how can I do that? And he says, I come here every 30 days. I'll be back next month with another open mic. Just come sign your name on the list. So I left, I went home, and I owned a BlackBerry at the time. That was my cell phone. So I wrote in that BlackBerry, and that's what started my relationship between my thumbs and those buttons. So moving forward, when I started to evolve into smartphones, I still wanted to write, and that's when I started buying empty BlackBerries just to write in. So I wrote what I considered as 2 poems within that next 30 days, and I memorized them because I didn't know that it was a such thing as reading a poem because my first example were
oh, right.
poets, and they didn't read, so I didn't know that that was a such thing. So I memorized them, and I went a month later, and I signed my name on the list. They called me up there. I got on the stage. I recited those 2 poems, and it's absolutely become my loan. Like since that time frame, I don't know, like cell phones, right? Prior to now, it's like, what did I do when I didn't have a cell phone? And that's how I feel about poetry. I have no clue where I reached to for sanity prior to poetry. Somebody the other day asked me, is there anything on earth that makes me feel the way poetry does? And I mean, aside from my daughter, there's absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's felt like that since that day.
I get that. I totally get that. I totally get that. We've had Christopher Michael on this show before.
Mm-hmm.
Love, 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 and a big huge shout out to Texas.
Yeah.
Um,
Those are the people, they literally raised me. Christopher Michael and all those guys, I never slammed, but they would take me to their slams. They would have me to keep time at the slams. I would do little poems. They would, good job, pat me on the back. You know what I mean? They would encourage me, say, hey, you're pretty good. You know what I mean? So I was like they little, I was just like follow them around, go to all the events. So they pretty much, I remember I was in Afghanistan. I was in Killeen, Texas. I learned about poetry. I started doing poetry. I started following around KPS, and I started going to their little events at Under the Hood Cafe and the places they would have the events. I would go up there. They would encourage me, tell me I did a good job. And these are people who I look up to. So that you did a good job means a lot at that point. So I go from there to Iraq. And now I'm in, no, Afghanistan. Now I'm in Afghanistan, and they have a poetry night in Afghanistan. So this is my first time ever presenting a poem away from that group of people. I feel like I don't branched out. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like if you take a karate class, whoever that sensei is, you'll never feel like you can beat that sensei. That's the person who taught you this. So to go somewhere else and now do karate where that sensei is not around, it's like, yeah, let me see what I'm really made of. So that's what had happened in Afghanistan. I went there was a poetry night, and it was time for me to see what I was made of. So I went a couple nights, and after I went a couple nights, people started to gravitate to it. And I remember like the fourth or fifth night that I went, which was probably the fourth or fifth month, because they had it once a month that I went. A guy was like, "Hey, do that poem that you did back such and such time." And I hadn't went over that poem, so it wasn't fresh in my head no more, but I tried to satisfy his request, and I dropped the poem. I got to about the third line and forgot it. I started over, got back to that line, forgot it. Didn't know what to do. I just walked off stage.
Oh.
At that point, in my mind, I was done. I was done with poetry. I didn't know what the term dropping a poem was. So I remember being in Afghanistan, walking back to where I lived. I'm on my cell phone, and I send Faressa from KPS a message on Facebook. And I said, "Hey, I just went on a stage and forgot a poem and didn't know what to do." She said, "Oh, you just dropped the poem. We all do it. Don't worry about it." That was my first time hearing the term "drop the poem." I'm like, wait a minute. Y'all do this? She was like, "Yeah, you dropped the poem."
Yeah, do it all the time.
That was the only reason why I kept doing poetry. If she would have made me feel like I was an anomaly or I was the weak exception, like, wow, that happened, I would have never wrote again. So not only did they raise me, but they were there for me to reach back during times where shit was going on in poetry that I didn't know what it was. And they was there for me to reach back and say, "Oh, no, that happens, you're good." So my existence is pretty much accredited to that circle of people that was in Killeen, Texas.
You gotta love having a really dope circle of people. You really gotta appreciate, like really. I have a dope circle of people. We always tell, like, people coming up behind us, you know what? People don't know you mess up till you mess up, until you tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you mess up a poem, trust me, we ain't catch that.
Right.
Even if we know the poem, we ain't catch that. They don't know you messed up till you tell them. You drop a poem, it happens.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, you couldn't have told me that 10 years ago. I was distraught.
So I'm kind of visualizing in my head. You're in the middle of Iraq or Afghanistan, right? Like freaking out because you dropped a poem. This is something you put in your memoirs. That's one of those stories that if you listen to yourself, you go, yeah, that deserves to go in my memoir.
Yeah, not because I was in Afghanistan, right?
No, not because you're just because.
I dropped a poem. That was just, oh man.
Right. Let's not freak out about the where we are. Let's freak out about the what just happened.
And for me, I had an extreme ignorance about poetry, specifically spoken word, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of people in Afghanistan with that same ignorance. And after I had been to a couple of those events, people appreciated what I was doing. So they would tell other people, "Hey, this guy is going to be doing poetry tonight. You should come check it out." And this was a night that a whole bunch of people was in there because of word of mouth. And these are people who probably have an ignorance about poetry. Somebody forced them to come, and they're in there like, what let me see what you're talking about. You keep talking about, and that's the night that I dropped the poem. So my opportunity to win over these people for this art form that were ignorant about it, I dropped the poem. So now people are looking at the person who bought them like, this is what you bought me to see, right? So dropping a poem and then adding that to it, I was finished. I was done with poetry.
That's crazy. That's so crazy. Like I said, it's things happen in the strangest way, in the strangest circumstances. And I, for one, am I'm glad they gave me the reassurance to keep going, because then again, we wouldn't be having this conversation had that not happened. Absolutely. So then what do you say? So then now what do you say to people coming up behind you? Because like I said, you have a lot of stuff you have a lot of knowledge to impart on people coming behind you. Now, what do you say to them in that situation? and not even that situation, but what do you say to them? What do you say to the newcomers, the people who are still reading from, phones and trying to find their way in spoken word? What do you say to those? What do you say to those people now?
Well, I think you said something very important. You said trying to find their way. I think what I would say to those people is from the start, be authentic, be absolutely true to who you are. Don't gravitate towards the popular topic in an effort to appease a crowd. There are tons of social issues in society. Poetry started off as a broadcast system for those social issues. Back in the days, it was a form of protest. So now, whenever something happens, you have a circle of people who are looking to poets like, so what are you going to write? Something just happened, right? A lot of poets, they succumb to the pressure of having to address all these social topics or feeling like they have to write about them all just because they're occurring. Everybody has a space of interest. Figure out what yours is and address that. Just because something else happened and you're a poet and people expecting you, don't feel the pressure to do that. Figure out where your lane is. Figure out what peace of mind exists for you within this art form, and stick to it. Don't overindulge in the popular sound because you'll subconsciously start to mimic it or sound like it. Figure out what your voice is and speak in that voice. So I think just being authentic, being true to yourself, poetry is it's a form of liberation. It's the purpose of writing isn't to recite a poem. There's something else. Somebody was feeling something they needed to get it off their chest. So they wrote in order to get it off their chest, in order to feel freed from a certain thing. And my opinion is as long as what you wrote served that purpose, then it's a good poem. Whether it's recited or not, it's still a poem. So I think people need to not limit themselves in what they say. Now you're taking the freedom out of one of the last pure freedoms we have left. Just figure out how to be absolutely free, how to be absolutely authentic, where your peace of mind is in this art form, and and get to it, regardless to how common it is or how it's perceived.
There are literally two things that came to mind. Kaniki usually asks during her segment a question of like that you basically just answered. And her question is, I think I'm paraphrasing. She can correct me toward the back end, but she usually asks a question about like, do you think it's the job of the poet to speak to the times? Not
I think,
necessarily about like a specific social issue, but do you think it's the job of the poet to speak to the times?
I think it's a job of a poet to speak from their heart. If something in their heart addresses the times, then by all means, I think it's the job of a poet to speak unprohibitedly and from their hearts. If a poet assumes the responsibility of speaking to the times, you'll find yourself writing poems about stuff that you don't have an authentic opinion about, right? So there's a whole bunch of things going on in society. Some of those things I don't have a developed opinion about. But if I feel the pressure to write, I'm going to be creating an opinion, going and seeing what other people think, adopting the popular opinion just so I can have a poem that's accepted. I
Yeah.
don't think that that's good at all. So I think the responsibility of a poet is to speak from your heart, and if that happens to address the times, then by all means.
Mm. That also that whole concept speaks to a piece of advice that I tend to or saying that I tend to have, and I'll ask you what you think. I always say um, that because we write so much from an emotional place, uh, I always say write for you, perform for them. I.e., once I'm done processing it enough to get it out, then my part of it's done. It's no longer for me; it's for them. What do you? How do you feel?
My opinion
How
of
do?
that.
Huh? Yeah.
My opinion of that. I think I've never heard the phrase "write for you, perform for them." I've never heard that before, but I
No,
100%
that's a whole me thing. So
okay, but I 100% agree with it. I think you write for you, and I think if people really did that, if they wrote for them, then content wouldn't be so hard to come about. There would be a lot more freedom. There would be therapy in spaces where we didn't know we needed it or we couldn't find it anywhere else. So I agree that we write for ourselves, and if we choose to recite it, then we figure out how to get it out in a way that it's going to be received well by the people who are listening. So it wasn't created for those people, but since I decided to share it with you, I'm gonna share it in a way that it resonates. So um, yeah, I wouldn't change or add any punctuation or anything to that phrase. I think it's perfect as you said it.
Yeah. And I clarified it to say when I say perform, I don't mean like I mean like really like I'm telling you this because here's what my experience is. Maybe it resonates with you, maybe it doesn't. But for the people it does, then this is for you. And if you're not, if it's not something that resonates with you, that's cool. We're here now. You know,
Mhm.
it's off my chest. I processed the emotion.
Right, right. I
So
agree.
so I have probably I'm looking at my list. I probably have a couple more questions for you off my list, and then uh, I will have you do another poem if you feel, and then bring back my co-host. So I'm gonna put them on notice to give me about 10 minutes ish.
Okay.
Um, so we've talked about the writing and the performance, right? And you know what? I'm gonna throw this question in now. We talked about the writing report. What are we reading? What's on your bookshelf? What are you reading?
What am I reading? That's a great question. Um, what am I reading right now? I'm always reading I always forget the title, the 48 Laws of Power. Um, the Art of Seduction is a book that I enjoy, but for the most part, I I no longer read the way I used to. I used to read books. Like I'll get a book and I'll read books. Now I read to find what I'm looking for, right? So there might be a chapter out of a book and I only indulge in that chapter and that's all I get from the book. So, and that can come from anywhere. That can come from an article. It can come from something that's online. So I don't just sit down, grab a book, and indulge in the book anymore. I read to find whatever it is that I'm looking for. But those are a couple of books I enjoy. One book I plan on reading is The Art of Broke or The Power of Broke. The Power of Broke is a book I intend to read. It just talks about how it's written by the guy who started Fubo,
Oh wow.
the black guy that's on Shark Tank.
Yeah. I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, Damon, something like that. But the book is about how when you don't have the resources to purchase all the services you need, you become extremely well rounded. Because now, if you want something to get done, you have to figure out how to do it yourself. So the individuals who started off without those resources tend to be the ones who are more well rounded. Where if you start off with a surplus of resources, you can
David
purchase it.
John.
Okay, you know. But if you start off with a surplus of resources, you may not be able to do much, but you know how to purchase everything you need done. So I just wanted to see what that book's about. Um, but yeah,
That was the quick. That was like the quick, real low key underneath the camera like Google search. I was like, I know his name is gonna drive me nuts if I can't find
yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So part of what I've been doing. So I'll throw this out there. Part of what I've been doing since almost the beginning, since we started the show. Not this episode, the whole show. Like we've been here since 2020, right? So
Congratulations.
I during my segment asked people what they're reading. Mostly I was asking what they're reading during quarantine because I figured people had time to read in quarantine, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've been curating a a book list.
Mm-hmm.
The people that, audio and physical books of people who've been on the show. And
Right.
what are you reading?
Okay.
So
Yes.
at some point I'll post up this curated list, and then I'll throw those on there. And normally our silent male member, not so silent analysis, because you saw him earlier, like he'll usually just post up links and stuff, and so those will go up during the when those should go up in the comments. Like he'll have the list of books and all the things and where to find them. I
Gotcha.
like knowing what's on people's bookshelves. Nine
Yeah.
times out of 10, when I have people on the show, there's a big old 4, 5, 6 shelf. Well, it's about 8 feet tall, but an 8 foot bookshelf sitting over there. And I have a whole section in there, a whole part of it is just poetry books.
Right.
And I'll go back and I'll reference it, not necessarily because I'm thinking for something. Sometimes I'll just pull a line and go, you know what, we're going to do this. Or
Right.
sometimes I like to know, again, what are people reading? I'm looking for stuff to add over there, and I'm not the Marie Kondo. I'm not. It doesn't spark your joy. If it's on my bookshelf, believe me, I've read it.
That's good.
So I am a book nerd, hence the segment.
A
Like
lot of
I like
information in these things.
I
For a
like
long time I wouldn't read books because I was extremely impressionable, and I was one of those people who, if it sounded good, I would incorporate it into my life, whether it made sense for me or not, just because it sounded good. And then I learned that anybody can write a book, right? My daughter wrote a book. Nobody approved the content. She put it out. I wrote a book. Nobody approved the content. So we're pretty much just, we're taking people's thoughts and we're incorporating those things into our lives. And I was very negligent in how I did that. I did it with no balance. And when we're kids, we're taught that the facts come from a couple places. They come from books. We read books to get facts, and they come from the news, right? So
Mhm.
neither of those things seem to be governed nowadays. So where does facts come from? You can't say it comes from the news. You can't say it comes from books. You can't say it comes from social media. So there's no real source of facts nowadays, unless it's one you created yourself.
Mm.
So for a long time, I didn't read books because I was very impressionable and I was scared that I would, intake some stuff I didn't need. But then I learned how to kind of, swallow meat and spit bones, and then I found it okay for me to read.
Yeah, I'm a if I digest what I read, but I also ask a lot of questions.
Hmm.
And I am a if something is I'm a consummate look stuff up, research
Hmm.
things. Something's not sitting right. If I like to understand, not just digest, but understand what I'm doing too. You're right. You're right though. There's not a there's no definitive place anymore. Like you can't go to your trusty dusty bookshelf and grab like the Encyclopedia Britannica and be like, this is law. That's it. You can't do that much anymore. Can't trust the internet. Not necessarily. Definitely can't trust what you see on social media by a long shot.
Right.
I love talking to subject matter experts. I like
Hmm.
going to the source
Right.
if possible. You know, like, oh, that makes so much more sense now.
Right.
Like if I want to learn about dairy farming, let me go to a dairy farm. How that works. I'm that
Right.
I'm that weird person that will do something like that.
Right. It's
But
probably the best way.
but speaking of that, that's one of those things that do you depend. This is topic dependent, of course. Do you do um, research for poems?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's, especially as it pertains to advocacy and abuse reduction, right? I'm talking about domestic violence. There's some things that I may need to know about that. If I'm talking about male victimization, there's some things I may need to know about that. So I'll definitely do research. Most of the time, the research comes after I've written something. I'll write something and then I'll read something I wrote, and I may want to go check the validity of that thing. So I'll go, do research. But yeah, absolutely.
That's why I brought that back around, because the thing I didn't ask you about is, so you do a lot around domestic violence and sexual violence. So first of all, how did we? I will ask the how did we get there? Like why that as a topic?
Well, I grew up in an abusive household where I witnessed abuse. So even if I wasn't being abused, directly. The collateral damage associated with watching a parent be abused is very traumatic. So we fast forward to the age of 31, I started writing poetry, and that was the first time that I had a way to address all those things that I had experienced prior to. So, as aforementioned, I don't just pick a topic and sit down and write about a topic. I hear a thing or get a feeling, and then I just start writing based off of that. So, after about a year, I look back over my catalog of poems, and a lot of it was addressing abuse. So, someone introduced me to a way that I could use those poems in a more official capacity. So now, most corporate America, most jobs in corporate America, they have an annual requirement to train on these topics. And that's a space to where poets are extremely useful, but those organizations don't know that they need poets. So it's going to be up to a poet to show up and say, hey, here's a way that I can address the same thing that you have to learn about, but in a way that people's actually going to listen versus putting them in front of a computer for an hour and saying, click through these things so you can get your annual training. So it was just a topic that I had been affected by personally. I was writing about and just figured out a way to address it in a more official capacity.
I will tell you that's a brilliant use of, let me take something that could have done a lot of things, but let me address it and then teach.
Mm-hmm.
I
Absolutely.
think that's a brilliant use of topic, I'm of that. I like the thinking behind that. And I appreciate that you're going out and talking about these things, because it's not a it's not a thing that gets talked about enough.
Right, right.
And even within the poetry community, it doesn't get talked about enough or on
Right.
stage.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't see an overabundance of poets going, okay, I'm going to address domestic violence on stage unless it is directly at you. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of things that probably a lot of things that need to be addressed within the community,
There's a lot of things we don't talk about.
which is weird because isn't that literally our jobs?
Yeah, I mean, even money, right? You think about, I know I went to school for 12 years. I went all through high school, and at one time was I given a class on budgeting money. And that was the first thing that I had to know how to do as an adult. But I got a million science classes on how to dissect roaches. You know what I mean? I've never had to dissect nothing, but every year I had a class on that. I've always needed to know
Did
how
you
to
say roaches? Oh God.
yeah, whatever it is that they wanted us to dissect, right? But everybody needs to know how to budget and count money. But if I teach you how to budget and count money, then you probably won't need my college loan, or you won't need my loan from the bank. So I can't get you smart enough to where you don't need these systems. So because of that, financial hardship is a problem. Is so widespread. But how often do you hear a poet get on stage and talk about the importance of budgeting money?
Somebody who's kind of, so we okay, I'm trying to remember, we've had at least one, if not two people, and we probably need to get sort of topic specific on the show sometime. And I know we've had somebody come in and address, um I know we had someone come in and address like copyrights and patents. We had somebody who actually works for a copyright office who's also a poet. We had eBaby. We've had Sekou Andrews on here,
Mm-hmm.
who did some of the financial conversations, you know. Um, and I thought that was really interesting. That's, again, it's one of those things that we just didn't talk about. We've had Sherry saying we had Shelly Says So, who actually does financial advising. And funny enough, I just had this conversation about Shelly because I'm getting Shelly to I'm going to talk to Shelly about doing some of that kind of work for my child. It's one of those things that there's just so many topics we don't address, and as people who address stuff, you would think those would be the top of the list, and they're not.
Right.
Financial literacy, domestic violence, like there's, good God, 10 topics I could just rattle off the top of my head that we're not addressing enough of.
Right.
So, I'm about to tangent off, and I don't want to do that. I want to stay here in this. So I'm gonna ask you. I'll ask you the last question in this series of questions. Since we were talking about things you're reading, right? I always have this one last sort of exit question. Appropriate, because we were also talking about how we're going to end, like ending things on a positive note, right? We were talking about that too. Mm-hmm. So this will do that, and then I'll step back and let you do a poem and bring in my co-host. I like to ask, what is your favorite book, author, or quotes? What is the thing you want to leave with people?
Okay, I'll go with quote.
It doesn't matter. You can pick 1, 2, 3, all of them. Book, author, quote. One of them, or all of them.
The first thing that came to my mind was a quote. And the quote is, every day you live is one day less that you have left. Right? And I think that's very important, because we have, now I'm going to go on a tangent. We have one opportunity at life. This experience is our own. And I think we have a responsibility to make sure it works out the way we want to, right? Sometimes we experience things in life. I experienced things in life that changed my design. Sometimes other people experience stuff in life that change their design, whether it's traumatic, whether it's just maturation. We experience things. And when those things happen, the location where we used to find peace is no longer the same, right? So now we got to figure out where peace is and get to it. And one of the most detrimental things that we can do is, whenever we're trying, I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, you have a group of friends and you all went out and y'all went and did clubs and things of that nature. Something happened, and now you don't want to be around a group of people. So now you detach from society and you're more withdrawn. So now you don't find peace in the club anymore. You have to figure out what peace is for you, and you have to get to it. That might be your living room, but that's going to be very unbecoming to the people who's dependent on your presence in order for them to have fun, right? So what most of us do is, we, instead of finding out where peace is for us, we'll conform to those requests from those other people, and we'll be somewhere that's not peaceful to us at our own detriment in order to satisfy a requirement for us, instead of figuring out what does peace look like for me and let me go get there, right? So every day we live is one day less that you have left. It pretty much, for me, it reminds me to figure out where my peace is and get there, and not spend another day outside of peace in order to satisfy someone else's requirement. So that's why that quote is very important to me.
That is a good back ending. Jeez. Now you got me thinking. All right. I think I'm gonna step off to the side. I'm gonna give you the floor, and we'll be back in 1 second whenever our co-hosts come back. Oh, please let me remove myself. I'm waiting for this.
It's amazing having a mind with a maze in it. I can spend days in it. I navigate it easily, but when others gaze in it, it's hazy, and they ask, hey, is he crazy? Just maybe, but he can't be, because he speaks so sensibly. See, it's like nobody gets me. Even family feels that I'm unfamiliar. They say he's a locked vault with a lost combination, and trying to get in is like trying to open a high security safe with a shoelace. He just strings us along, but he never comes ajar. He's a jar with a tinted glass and it's tightened top that don't twist off, and he gets pissed off when he's questioned. He only answers to his daughter, his seed, Brooklyn Elise. At least she has the key, but we we're sort of kept at arm's reach. We're wondering, why is this? Maybe he needs to schedule a psych visit because he speaks in images, but his feelings aren't quite vivid. We got a feeling that he's hoarding hard times in the basement of his belly, and we're afraid if he doesn't purge, hell will emerge. We can't read him. He's written in Arabic. He's a man grenade that doesn't talk. He just writes, and he just might explode if we pull his pin. He carries Colorado winters in his chest. His sentiments are like icicles. What we call cold, he calls a coping mechanism. And what's even colder is we're starting to think that he's a cutter. Not himself, but others. He cuts folks off like bad traffic. And if he feels like you're at his neck, he'll cut ties. We're lost in how he's so copacetic. We're lost. And we can't tell if he loves because he carries the emotions of a dead emoji. We couldn't even contract U-Haul to move him. So what do you do when the only way that you know to live has been killing those that you live for? When all your loved ones are thrown in their hand because they can't win with the way you deal? When your hard face is considered as heartless, when you're the black sheep, and not even your shepherd knows how to receive you.
God damn it. I'm doing this before they even come back in here. I
appreciate it.
First off, I'd like to thank Pepco for restoring my electricity. I saw
that.
I sure got kicked out the show.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my word, Obbie.
Okay.
I did not need to cry tonight. So my first question to you right now is, you have a poem about Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
You did it when you were here last in DC earlier this summer. And I was curious as to your inspiration for writing that piece.
I'll answer it this way. I think there's a lot of people, we all are artists, and I think there's a lot of people who their only representation of their issue exists in our voice box, as crazy as that may seem, right? Mm-hmm. So it was an opportunity to address an issue that most people who have the issue don't have the platform to address. I remember being in a public place, and matter of fact, I remember sitting on an airplane, and the guy next to me, his arm was just shaking, and we're on a small airplane, seats aren't that big, and I just feel his arm shaking. And I'm a pretty open-minded person, but I could imagine someone who's not, how they would have responded to having to sit next to someone who's going to be shaking the entire time, right? And the level of scrutiny, the level of rejection, the level of all of those things that he may receive on a daily basis that he has to normalize. And sometimes in the absence of understanding, it breeds callousness, right? If you don't understand a thing, you don't have the ability to empathize with it. So if I can write a poem that's going to bring a level of understanding to that thing, then there may be a group of people who are now more outfitted to empathize with that thing than there was before. So after having that experience with that guy that was on the plane and just seeing other situations where I seen people doing a thing that I knew may have been Parkinson's, I wrote the poem. And I wrote that poem and a poem about MS at the same time. And it was just kind of standing in the gap for people who don't have the platform to address those things for themselves.
Now, you mentioned earlier about researching your poems. So you wrote this one, and did you research about the conditions to make sure that you were speaking to them correctly?
Well, I spoke to people who have those conditions.
Okay.
And I sent those individuals the poem. Actually, I never seek approval for anything that I write, because I just feel like poetry is our truth. Like, how do you approve my truth?
Right.
Whenever I'm writing to represent a demographic that I'm not personally with, mm-hmm. I will seek approval for those poems. I'll go to someone that's part of that demographic and say, can you listen to this? Am I misrepresenting you all? And I'll allow them to tell me yes or no. If they say no, then we're going to do it. If they say I'm misrepresenting them, then we're going to trash whatever that is. Okay. If they say no, this is a great representation, then we'll keep the poem. So in both cases, I did that.
Ooh, okay. I will pass it around to one of my team members right now.
That's amazing. That answers the question. You remember we were having a discussion with somebody about not delving into topics that didn't belong to you. Like
Yeah.
as a poet, I can't remember who it was, but they were saying if you didn't experience this, it's not your experience, that you shouldn't write about it, right?
Mhm.
So, and we were asked, that answers the question about that, right? That you can give voice to topics and stand in the gap for people who don't have a voice for it, right? This is not their platform, but bringing it to a platform of artistry where people can understand it, right? So that's great. That's great. Are you Mr. West? So good to see you. Sorry I wasn't here at the opening of the show.
I'm here now. Thank you.
Yes, good. Shout out to my 4-month-old who is our not so silent partner as well. So she's first for everything now. She's first. She's first. But I wanted to ask, do you think you're better read or better heard?
Heard. For me, I think I'm better heard because I explained this earlier. I'll repeat it though. Um, I'm a big fan of the creative writing aspect of it, and with that, there's a very there's relationships between syllables. There's certain things that exist that make these poems sonically appealing, right? And in order for me to create or make way for some of those things, it's all in the pronunciation. So when you read something I wrote, you're going to pronounce it the way that you're familiar with the word, and you're going to lose that aspect, that element of the writing. So the content may be there, but that other element of it isn't there. So I would love for anything I write to be on display in its maximum um, capability as much as it can be. And I think if I write, it takes away from that. My daughter, on the other hand, she doesn't need the aid of her voice. She doesn't need the aid of her appearance. She can just write, and you can read it, and you'll see it exactly what she was saying. I don't feel like I'm as skilled in that area, so I think what I say comes off better.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to. I asked that question specifically because I was listening to. I mean, everybody doesn't have. Let's be clear. Everybody does not have an artist ear, right? So as artists or as writers, you're listening for the creative content. You're listening, or you're listening for the way that the poem is presented, right? But everybody doesn't have that. They're just waiting for what the punchline on what it is. So that's why I asked that. I always like to ask the question of what the artist thinks, like your experience of
Good
people.
question.
Um, sometimes I listen to a poem and I say, I really would like to read that. So sometimes I'll ask artists, do you have that I can read that so I can go back and get, you know.
Right.
So yeah. And I have had the opportunity of seeing you perform live. You were amazing. I
Thank
think I
you.
probably told you that when I saw you.
Thank you.
When people ask what you do for a living, what do you say?
I say I'm a poet.
Just a
Yeah,
poet.
just a poet. I say I'm a poet. I don't say I'm an artist. I get down to exactly what I am. So I say I'm a poet, even in advocacy, right? Advocacy for me, I've been to presentations that talked about sensitive topics, and those presentations they were inundated with data, right? Data. And I'm not really moved by data. Like I'm a junk food fanatic, and I can eat a candy bar and I can look at the nutritional facts. It'll tell me all the damage it's going to do to me,
Mm.
and I'll still eat it while I'm reading that. But if I go to the hospital and I'm diagnosed with diabetes, that news is going to emotionally affect me, and instantly I'm going to go change my diet. So
Mhm.
I had the data already, but nothing. I didn't have any emotion to attach to that data in order for it to become a call of action. So that's why poetry works in those spaces, because those people are used to looking at statistics. This is how often this happens. This is how often when you present a poem about the topic, now it attaches the emotion to the data, and now it becomes a call for action. So even within advocacy, it works because I'm a poet. So
Mhm.
everything I do works because I'm a poet. So when someone asks me what I do for a living, I say I'm a poet.
That's a very poetic answer as well. And when you tell these people that you are a poet and they say, who do you write poetry for? What would that answer be?
Who do I write poetry for?
Who is your poetry for?
Oh, well, first and foremost, it's for me, right? Yeah, it's for me. And I choose to recite it out loud, and there may be a circle of people who also resonate with that thing, and then it becomes for them as well. Maybe some who don't, but it's for me. And I found spaces where other groups have found it useful. Other groups have been willing to pay for it at the rates where I've been able to live off of it. So it's written for me, and then I allow other people to listen to it, and
Hmm.
people like,
Fantastic. Okay, I'll ask questions all day. This is not my segment, so I'm going to pass it on to analysis.
Yeah, man. So fantastic, my brother. I always enjoy when you and I have even a few minutes just to snatch some conversation, but
absolutely.
I definitely enjoy being able to hear you at greater length, get into some things, and even before asking questions per se, I mean, there's just some things that I want to highlight that really resonated with me, especially when you talk about your practice method. I love the idea of using radio and TV to practice over as a distraction, temptation, and working on your poems that way. I think I'm gonna have to incorporate that, because usually when I'm at that stage, I end up trying to call somebody or get somebody in the room, but that's a quick and easy way to even discipline with oneself by oneself. So I really love that. And it shows, because your delivery is extremely smooth and conversational, as you say. Your lyricism and the how do I want to phrase it, the relaxed nature of your delivery adds to its power. So it almost sounds dichotomous, but it's not. The natural relaxed way in which you deliver your poems adds to the power of your lines. And so I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I love the story about the first time you really were dropping poems out when you were deployed. And it reminds me actually of one of Sherry's questions. And she can tell you more about this, but Sherry often likes to ask about the first time that an artist performed poetry live. So this is like a modification of that first time dropping pieces live. And the fact that you got that encouragement to keep going speaks to what I think is so crucial in this kind of global poetic family that we have.
Absolutely.
And the fact that in your case it literally was global. You had to call, cross hemispheres. It's just fascinating.
Time zone, yeah.
About that, I love that. You have just added tonight another one of my favorite Obbie West lines. So let me back up, and I may have told you this before. One of my favorite lines, Sherry and I have talked about this line before. You have another love poem. I can't remember the title of it. Where you say, and I'll butcher this so you can correct me, something to the effect of, I want to take the wind that threatens to dishevel her hair and the rain that threatens to do something, and grab both of them by the throat and say, I wish a motherfucker would. You gotta understand that's my favorite lines of poetry in the art of poetry, that particular piece. And so you just added to it tonight. When you're talking about what did you say? Her cry sounds like a license to kill anyone foolish is enough to force a frown to form upon her face. All right, so that just has joined the pantheon of Obbie West lines.
I appreciate that.
You need to know that. I want to ask you this. You talked about the fact that you didn't really start into poetry until your 30s, and Girl Genius talked about not starting in 20s. I'm a one up the ante on both of y'all and say I didn't start until my 40s. But do you sense that has brought a difference to your poetry, a maturity to your writing that maybe would not have been there if you had started at a young age like most of the other poets?
Absolutely. It would have been extremely detrimental to me to start before that for several reasons. One, I was in the military when I started. I was 31. I joined when I was 17. I'd already been in the military for 14 years. I got 6 more years before I can retire. The second I started doing poetry, it became the most important thing in my life, more important than that job. even though that job is what was paying me. So the only reason in that job was keeping me from being able to do poetry at the rate I wanted to. So I felt like I started to develop a bit of disdain for that job because it was holding me back from this. So I say that to say the only reason I didn't get out was I only had 6 years left. If I would have learned about poetry after I had only been in for 5 years, I would have quit the military and went and been doing features for $20, sleeping in cars. I would have never retired. So that's one reason why it's great that I didn't learn earlier. And prior to being 31, or waiting to be 31, gave me an opportunity to develop confidence in who I am, gave me an opportunity to shed the need to conform to other perspective. And that became valuable when I wrote because I didn't have any reservations in saying whatever I wanted to say because I wasn't worried about perception. If I would have learned about poetry at 16, 17, where I cared about what people thought, I would have only been writing to appeal that perception. So I wouldn't have been authentic. So later in life, after I became a man, it gave me the freedom to write for me and not just write in order to impress people who may be listening. I hope that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. Dig that. And in following up, in terms of your justice pieces and your issue pieces, which you know is the thing I love most, as far as my writing and other folks' writing. What is the reaction to your issue pieces that you can tell? You've mentioned that important combination of facts and poetic interpretation, if we want to call it that, of the show subject, and which is one of the reasons why those of us that write justice poetry or issue poetry do that in those spaces, as you say, and the power of adding that to those spaces. What kind of feedback have you had? Have you had folk come to you and say, you elucidated that in a way that I wouldn't have understand? Was there a particular piece in your repertoire that seems to always pull people afterwards, or seems to resonate with people? What is your sense of the impact of your justice pieces or your issue pieces?
Great question. Most times those poems are written from the perspective of the person who is struggling with that thing. Like the Parkinson's poem is written from the perspective of a person who has a male victimization piece. It's written from the perspective of a man who is scared to go report, right? He's saying things like, I just thought that it would look funny to fill out a report with bulging biceps, right? So things of that nature. So most of them are presented from that point. One is from, it talks about the long-lasting effects of sexual assault. So it's from the mind of a person who has been sexually assaulted and they've lost support. So the response is always there's someone who felt those ways and didn't know how to express it. So there's a lot of men who come to me and say, hey, I've been through a thing and I didn't know how to explain why I didn't want to report. And now I can go back and explain myself. I don't want to go on a tangent, but this will make it make sense. There's a lot of things about me that I wanted to be fixed. So I started going to therapy. And therapy has never fixed me, but I continue to go. What therapy has done for me, it's given me the information about myself so that I can now explain myself to the people who I care about, right? Because if you don't know it's me, then you think it's you. So if there's a behavior towards you, you may take that behavior personal. But when you know that behavior is attached to a diagnosis, you no longer take it personal. Like if I have Alzheimer's and I forget your name, you're not going to take it personal because you're going to attach that memory loss to that disease. But if you don't know I have Alzheimer's, you're just going to think I've disregarded you. So if you don't know it's me, you're going to think it's you. So therapy has allowed me to explain to people that it's me so they don't think it's them. Same thing with the poetry. Being able to present it from the standpoint of a person who's struggling with a thing is giving a lot of people the information that they need to now explain themselves to the people who care about them. So that's been the most common response that I've gotten.
Right on.
Thank you.
Can I add something just on this? One of my big things, I talk about therapy a lot. I wrote a whole book about poems I wrote in therapy, right? Therapy, for a little perspective, is not the fix. it's the toolkit.
Mm.
It's not meant to give you the fix ever. It's meant to give you the toolkit, the language to address it, the things you can do, you know, the screwdriver, the nails, the hammer. It's not actually meant to, it's not the fixer. It's just, here are the things that are wrong and here are the things you can use to fix them.
Great point.
All right. So
The
girl
last question
genius.
of the night.
Last
You're very smart, girl genius. They don't call you the girl genius for nothing.
Listen,
Listen.
5 years full of therapy, 5 years of finished therapy. I've figured this out. It's not the fix. It's just, here's the things.
I do want to ask Obbie one more question before we wrap it up.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you to tell the audience how they can support you financially, and support you if they don't have money. How do they support you to do that?
Me directly.
You have merch, first of all. Yes.
Yeah, I do. I've cut that down significantly. I love fashion, and my website ended up becoming a clothing store. So I had to cut that down significantly, but I do have merch on my website, which is at the top of the screen. It's obbiewest.com. I have a episodic program called the Brain Dump Series. I released the second episode here recently, sometime in August. Those are on YouTube. You subscribe under Obbie West. If someone gives those some time and look at those, that will be extremely supportive of me. Again, I don't want to give you a politically correct answer, but that's how you can support me directly. Outside of that, my ultimate goal in poetry is to just be a small part of the group that pushes this art form to a place to where it's recognized on the same level of these other genres of art, rap, R&B. You can have a brand new rapper who's a household name. You can have a premier poet who no one knows, right? So I think when people are receptive of the art form, it just allows us to push it to those levels. So holistically, if you want to support me, just be receptive of the art form, whether or not I'm the person that's presenting the poem or not. Just be receptive of the art. Just give it a listen. If you don't like it, don't listen again, but at least just give it a listen.
All right, we ready.
All right, here you go. I'm going to ask you the last question of the night, and it's the hardest question you'll answer. I know we've been throwing stuff at you left and right. This is the hardest question you'll answer all night.
Okay.
So, you know, this is the Kit Mo, let's talk about the book edition. Sherry's segment is called From Behind the Microphone. Kaniki is Poets and Platforms, and our other host, hers is Passion Projects, right? That's the name of the segments. So, now that you have been on the show, who do you think will make a good guest?
A good guest.
Yeah, whose brain should we pick?
I mean, the name I'm thinking of, I would imagine he's probably been here, but I'm gonna say Talon.
He could come back.
He can come back. We've had him here. That was a really good show. That was a really good show. He's actually the reason why I started doing spoken word.
Yeah, he has a lot of information. So
Yeah. And he was I just saw him last 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that episode, I'm gonna go back and find that one to specifically put that on the Spotify list. Like, I'm gonna load that one to come up next.
I actually have to call him. I was at an event recently, and he told me after the event, he said, "Hey, I enjoyed you, but you kept me here the whole time. And when I'm listening to a set, I like to go from here to here to here to here to here, but you kept me here." So I have to call him and figure out what the hell that means, right? Because when he told me, music was playing, so I need to figure out what that means and see how do I. So I got some game I gotta go get.
I like that. Oh, I love that. I love that.
That was when we were discussing first features and first, you were talking. I walked in and I saw, that's actually what happened to me. I told him that when he was here on the show because I hadn't had a chance to tell him. But the first poetry venue I ever walked into, a coworker of mine found out I wrote a poem for a wedding, and decided she wanted to drag me to an open mic, and it just so happens it was a Talam AC feature. And that is how I figured out that this existed the way that it, in the form that it does.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
What a great first experience.
Right. I was like, just and so happened.
Right.
So everyone in the room in the background here, please give a huge round of applause for our speaker, for our special guest this evening, Obbie West.
Thank you.
You get the
The
you get
gentleman poet. I think he needs to put that on his tag somewhere, because Obbie and I have talked about this at other times when we've been talking to ourselves. Y'all know I'm a woman, random man in my DMs, but he came so respectfully. He's like, yeah. He's like, hi, my name is Obbie. I know I don't know you, but somebody told me I should reach out to you if I want to feature in DC. Here's all my information. Get back to me. That is how I met Obbie.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
Wait a minute. I would like to point out what was my response.
Yep, once, twice a year, I get an email. Once a year, I get an email.
I'll see that same message. Hey, Sherry, I'm back. What can we do?
Yep.
What?
What's crazy is asking my response to that.
Every time you're like, yeah, I'll come back. If I have a spot, I got you.
Yeah.
But my other hosts that are around me in my week at Busboys, if I call them and say, hey, Obbie's coming back, they're like, Sherry, I got you. We got it.
Well, you know, hey, it's whatever. Whoever Sherry says feature, that's who you feature. I learned that years ago, right? Sherry's like, oh, here's their
When
details.
Sherry
Whatever.
says,
I don't even ask them. I don't even look at the thing. She still sends all the videos. I don't even look at it no more. I'll be like, booked, because she has never steered me wrong. Trust.
Absolutely.
Thank
There are people whose recommendations I take highly. When she told me about the first message, I was like, I know who that is. Come on. Go ahead. Yes.
Right.
I'm blessed. I'm blessed to get good friends that are extremely talented, who recommend extremely talented people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be back next week at 7 p.m. with Passion Projects. Please like, subscribe, follow, let us know. Be back right here with us. As we always say, stay safe, wash your hands, and good night.
Thank you.
Peace.